Hi everyone and welcome to this new video in which I continue my web exploitation series. Now at this point we are almost done with the series. We have seen a lot of different attacks and so far these are all the episodes that we've covered from 1 to 8. An introduction to web exploitation and web application. We discuss about Burp Suite, which is one of the most used tools in this context, in the context of web exploitation, and then we started to see specific attacks. Now, the way that I chose this attack were in regards to OSCP. So my objective was, let's reach an OSCP level, a level that you can comfortably do OSCP with, and let's analyze the main vulnerability you will be required to exploit. And these are SQL injections, directory traversal, file inclusion, file upload, common injection vulnerabilities, and at the end, I also wanted to mention cross-site scripting. Now, when it comes to cross-site scripting, I do not think you need to be an expert in XSS when it comes to OSCP. Probably you won't even use it most of the time. However, it is important to know it, and I wanted to put in this introductory web exploitation course because cross-site scripting, XSS, is a first example of client-side vulnerability. So I wanted to discuss a vulnerability that attacked the client and not the server, while the other, SQL injection, directory traversal, and so on and so forth, they were server-side, meaning that their objective was to attack the server. Now that we've seen all these different attacks, at this point I want to talk about enumeration, and in particular the next 3 videos will all be about enumeration, and they're gonna be about, this one is enumeration of files and directories. The next one instead I'm gonna talk about enumeration of virtual hosts, and what are virtual hosts and how they work, and also the difference between virtual host and DNS domains. And then we're going to talk about the enumeration of parameter. So like get parameter, post parameters, how do you discover the parameters of a page and stuff like that. The 12th episode we will talk about brute forcing credentials. So this is with respect to maybe HTTP login forms, but also maybe SSH instances, FTP instances. It is true this series is all about web exploitation, but at the end, I want to discuss a bit about network protocols and brute forcing on network protocols specifically, and the last video that I want to do has to do with DNS zone transfer attacks. For now, this is the list of topics that I want to cover. Maybe before finishing the series, I will actually change them up. And so in this specific episode, we can actually talk about enumeration of files and directories. So the first thing we need to do is we need to build this Docker image. So this Docker image is defining a specific Docker and we need to build it because the Docker compose file actually uses this nginx lab image. And by default, you will not have this because this is custom made. And to create this image, you need to build this Docker file. Now, how do we do that? It's pretty simple. The command is docker build -t. Then we put the name of the image, so nginx lab, and then we put a dot, and this dot will represent the current folder. This is because in the current folder we have the Docker file, file, which is this one. It's the file that specifies how to build the image. So we can do docker build -t, the name of the image, and then a dot. We wait and then it builds. Now, since I've already built it, it takes nothing, no time for me. For you, it will take maybe a few minutes. At the end, you should have this nginx lab latest image. Now, after you built the image, how do you actually use it? Well, it's really simple. The idea is to use this docker compose file as follows. You do docker compose and then up. You wait and the server is up and running. So it created an instance with this docker. And if we check this file, we can see that it's gonna map the 1337 port of my host into the 80 port within the Docker. And notice indeed, on the right, I went with the browser into localhost 1337, and here I see the page that I wanted to showcase for this demo. Now, what is enumeration? Why do we have to talk about enumeration, and why enumeration is extremely important in the context of OSCP, but also in many different contexts? Well, the idea is pretty simple. When we have a web server, we are offering resources to the various web clients, and we have come accustomed to that all throughout this course and this series. So the idea is that the client will make an HTTP request and the server will respond with a certain HTTP response. We can see, for example, a simple request with the curl command. So we say curl-v to print out the HTTP codes, and then we do HTTP, which is the protocol, localhost semicolon 1337, which is the port. When we do this command, notice what we get. So here, initially, we get the get/http/1.1. So this is the request we are making, and this is the response that the server is giving us. And after the HTTP response, within that response, it is also contain the text/HTML answer. So this is what the browser then process and renders to the user. Now, what's the idea? Suppose that we try to ask for a resource which does not exist. For example, the file hello.txt. Let's do it in the browser, hello.txt. Notice what we get. We get an Nginx error code which says 404 not found. Essentially it means, look, the resource you asked is not present within this web server, therefore I cannot give it to you. And the standard error code associated to this event is the 404. So HTTP standardization has standardized the fact that when a resource is not found, you reply with a 404. And we can see the same thing with curl here. It says HTTP, instead of 200 OK, this time is 404 not found. So there is this specific return code which has a both numerical and textual part. The numerical is this 404, the textual is not found. Now, why is this important? Well, the idea is that sometimes in our page, like for example here, right, we have a really simple landing page. If we check the source code of this page, we will see a bunch of HTML, a really simple CSS, and a really simple HTML in general. And then we have different pages. We have the about page, we have the contacts page, and we have the miscellaneous.html page. So we have 3 different pages, and if we check those pages, they are pretty much similar. It's really like simple, it's almost empty, you could say. It just says, this is the about page, this is the contacts page, and this is the miscellaneous page. So nothing special. And as a side note, I always suggest you to look at the HTML code, because if someone inserted HTML comments, you would not see them in this rendering of the page. To actually see the comments, you have to go into the view source. However, in this case, there are no comments, so all the information that we could see in the render view, we can also see in the code. There is nothing new added. The question here is rather different. Instead of having something in the code that we do not see, the question we have to ask ourselves is, maybe the person who configured this web server has set a specific directory within their server to host, to give out all this content, right? And in this folder, there is an index.html page, which is the page where we are seeing. And then there is a pages folder with all the different about.html, contacts.html, misc.html, so with all the different pages. Now the question is, could there be more? Could there be more pages? Like for example, a secret page or an API endpoint or whatever else. The idea is that just because those resources are not mentioned in the HTML we get from the server, it does not necessarily mean that they do not exist server side. At this point, we know nothing about server side. We just know what the server returned to us. Is there a reason to believe that there could be more resources? Well, it depends. There could be. We have to test out these kind of things. We have to be like, wait a second, how can I test if more resources are actually offered by the web server? And this is where the idea of enumeration comes in. So we talk about enumeration, which is a term that comes from computer science. To enumerate is to list out all the possibilities. So let's say that you have a logical puzzle, like or also a game of chess, whatever like structure you have, to enumerate is to list out all the possibility. So you say, okay, this is one valid move, move 1. Then you have another valid move, move 2. Then you have another valid move, move 3, and so on. You make a list of all the possibilities. In the context of web exploitation, and in particular web enumeration that we are doing in these videos, to enumerate means to list out all the resources that the web server offers. And the question now is, of course, how do I do it? So how can I enumerate all the resources that the web server is offering? Well, the idea is that we have to do it in a try and see what happens sort of way. What do I mean by this try and see what happens? Well, the idea is that we tried, for example, to access the resource, let's try hello.txt, and we get a 404. Now, how can we interpret this? We can interpret this in a really basic way. A basic interpretation could be that, look, in the server, there is no file called hello.txt. Now, how much information did we get from this query? Well, we understand now that hello.txt probably does not exist on the server. And then we can try for another, like command.txt. Once again, we get another 404. So we also know that command.txt does not exist on the web server. Now, as you can see, the main idea behind enumeration is to just list out a bunch of potential possibilities, like file 1, file 2, file 3, file 4, file 6, etc., and then try all of them one after the other. So we try to access that resource, and depending on the way that the web server replies to us, we check saying, look, this does not exist, this exists, this returns me a 302, so a redirect, this returns me a 500, so an internal server error, and things like that. The idea is that if we find a resource for which the web server returns us with a 200 OK, then it could be the case that that resource actually exists on the web server. Now, this is not always like this, and at the end of this video, I will show an example where this is actually not the case, and in those situations, we have to be a bit more nuanced and sophisticated. However, for a starting point into enumeration, it's a pretty good framework to have in mind. So the idea is that I do one request, like for example, resource res.txt. I send this to the web server, and if the web server replies with me with 404, I say like it doesn't exist. If it replies with me with a 200, I say yes, it does exist. Now, how do you do it? Do you manually try all the possibilities like that? Obviously not. There are automated tools to do this, and in particular, in this video, I will showcase one such tool, which is called gobuster. So this is a binary written in Go. It is a directory enumerator. It enumerates actually much more than directories. It has various modes of functioning. And for example, we can see that it has the dir mode, the DNS mode, the fuzz mode, the S3 mode, so like, and the WOS mode. In particular, we will see the dir mode in this video and the WOS mode in the subsequent video. So in the next video, we will see the WOS mode, which is for enumerating virtual host. So the dir mode instead is for enumerating directories and files, because in the context of web servers, both directories and files, they act as general resources. So you can either access a file or you can access a directory. Now, to actually get the tool, you can use the README here in GitHub. It says installation. You can firstly install Go, and then you can do go install like it's described in this GitHub page, github.com/oj/gobuster. Now, once you install the command, how do we actually use it? Well, before using such commands, the idea is to have a word list. And word lists are really important when it comes to enumeration. Now, what is a word list? It's exactly what it says. It's a list of words. Of course, the concept of word list is used in many different scenarios, in many different contexts within cybersecurity. For example, when we are trying to crack a password, we also use word list. The difference is what those words represent. what are representing these words? In the context of files and directories enumeration, the word list will be a list of words that represent either files or directory that are commonly found in web servers. So here there is all a statistical discussion that you have to understand, and the idea is that the common word list you will use have been made in such a way as to contain the most popular directories and files that you will find in any sort of web server. And these have come from like the community, so it's a really important resource to have. You can also make your own word list throughout your career and activities as penetration tester or bug bounter, but that's a general idea. Now, how do we get our word list? Well, we can use the seclist repository from GitHub, and specifically here I prepare a command. It's this wget. So this wget downloads directly from the raw GitHub section of the seclist GitHub repository of Daniel Missler, and the word list we're trying to download is the directory list 2.3 medium. So this is like a medium-sized directory, so we wait really fast, it's really fast. The directory is roughly 1.9 megabytes, so we can just open it, and as you can see here, it starts with index, images, download, 2006, news, crack, serial, and stuff like that. And the priority order case sensitive, so we have a bunch of different things, and this is under this copyright license. So we thank, of course, the author for making it available. Now, how do we use such thing? Well, the idea is that, okay, let's say that we have our website right here, and we have gobuster, and we have our word list. So let's put our word list into like word list, and then I put directory word list. Perfect. Now it's in word list, is in this directory. Now, how do we use it? The idea is the command is like this, gobuster, so we call the gobuster command, then we put the mode of operation, which in this case is the directory mode, so remember dir. Then we can set the number of threads. Typically, I think by default it's like 10. We can put 15, we can put 20 with a -t. So this -t is number of threads. And the idea is that the more threads you have, the more you can parallelize your work. But of course, also be careful, because the more number of threads you have, the more traffic you will generate, and the more you might be blocked by web application firewalls, by general firewalls, and things of the sort. So be careful with your traffic also for the sake of other people. Then we find the -- word list flag, which essentially says, give me the word list you intend to use. And in this case, we simply give the word list we just downloaded, so the one that we put into the word list directory. Then we put the host name that we want to enumerate. So in this case, it's HTTP, and then we put localhost, and then we put the port 1337. And this is a first command to use. That's it. It's really simple. Notice we have the gobuster, the directory mode, and the number of threads. I mean, we don't even need the number of threads, to be honest. We can also remove this. We just specify the word list and the host we want to use the word list on. And then we press enter and we initialize the command. As soon as we make the command start, among the first entries of the word list, notice how fast it's going, it almost seen half of the word list, and in a little bit it's gonna finish, essentially. Well, the idea is that we found two different directories. We found the pages directory, which actually we already know it existed, so there's nothing new there, but we also found the /API directory. Now, the /API directory is different from the pages directory, because while within the web server, we had a direct mention of the pages directory right here. After all, here it says, look, page / so it's a directory about.html. So we knew about pages, but we did not know about API. There's no mention about API. And if you go into API here, we get a forbidden. We do not get a 404 not found. We get a forbidden. It probably means that the directory actually exists on the server. It's just that we are not authorized to access it. So that's different, that's interesting. And so this is our first command. And of course, all these commands I will put linked down in the description. Now, how can we do a different command? Well, the idea is that in the Docker, I said that we are running a PHP application, so we might be interested in enumerating PHP files. So we can do, for example, -x for saying the extension of the files we are interested in is PHP. And then we can run again. And once again, it doesn't find anything much other than the pages and the API. But at this point, we might be able to, we might be wondering like, okay, but what is within the API folder? It could be like a PHP script, right? So we want to enumerate not the root directory of the web server, but the API specifically, the API directory. So we do not call the command with just the domain name, which would implicitly just enumerate the root folder and that's it, but rather we specify, look, the folder I want to look for is /API/. So I want to look inside the API folder in order to extract PHP file. And so I have to do this and also put the -xphp to add the file extension. And if we run this and we wait a little bit, notice what we get. We get a command.php which has returned a status of 200. Now, as we said, typically when we have a status of 200, we can sort of assume that it means that this resource exists on the web server. And we can quickly check this, of course. So we stop the scan, we go into the web server, and we're going to, okay, let's go API command.php, and then it says, look, use the CMD parameter. So we did find this resource and it's telling us to use this particular parameter. So let's just do it. Let's do CMD uguale who am I, and we get code execution. Now, of course, this was just an example to showcase the enumeration and the finding of hidden files and directories. It was not meant to explain how to exploit this remote code execution, because this is a really simple remote code execution that is running within the Docker. So if we do a uname A, we get all the things that typically happen inside a Docker. So this is the host name, which is this hexadecimal string because it is within the Docker. And so we have discovered this special resource. How did you do that? Because first we discovered the API directory, and then we enumerated within the API directory with a specific file extension. Another file extension that I typically use is the /xtxt file extension, and specifically, if we enumerate the pages folder this time with the txt text extension, what do we get? We get this secret.txt file. Now, of course, in this example, I knew it was there, so this is why I chose the txt extension. However, you can sort of start to understand what are the interesting extensions that you could enumerate for, and just enumerate a little bit. Like, enumeration is really an art because there are no clear indications sometimes that you have to enumerate for a specific file extension. However, for example, .txt, .html, .php, .ini, which is like config.ini, so stuff like .ini, .sql or db, something.db, like those kind of things, you can just come up with those kind of extension, and after a lot of practice, it comes more intuitively. So if you go into the /pages/secrets, we get hi, this is the password you can use for logging into the database instance used for development. Of course, this password does not work. It was a little Easter egg just to showcase that sometimes you might find resources which are extremely useful by doing this sort of enumeration. And so, before going with the second and last laboratory for this video, let's go a quick review of what we discussed so far. So the idea is that we have this Docker environment which presents a really simple web application, and I created this environment with the idea of showing what it means to enumerate files and directories. The idea behind enumeration is we want to check which resources are actually offered by the web server. We do not know all of them, we just know the ones mentioned in the HTML code, but there could be other. For example, in this case, we actually found many resources. And in particular, if you go into the www.html, where is the root of this web server, we find the API directory, and within the API directory, we do find the command.php file. And if you check this file, it is a simple system shell. So it's a simple web shell that uses the parameter cmd if the parameter has been set. Otherwise, it prints use the CMD parameter. So this is extremely simple. The idea that I wanted to bring and showcase is that we did not know of the existence of this directory and file. And how did we discover that? Through enumeration. First, we enumerate the directories and then we enumerate the files. And the commands we use, as a quick recap, were this is so to download the word list, we use wget, which is like curl. It is used to download HTTP file. Then this is the first gobuster command. We can remove the -t. So we specify mod dir word list and the host we're interested in. And this is for directory enum, enumeration. The second command instead was, we went into the API folder and we looked specifically for PHP files. So we add the -x PHP parameter, which says look also for PHP files. And the other one was look for TXT files, but starting from the pages folder, the pages directory. So this is essentially the idea of these commands, and when we execute them, we get good results. So for example, in this case, I execute this, I have to say, let's see, it's a word list, not with plural, just with one single letter. So word list. So we can replace those three, and we see the command.php, and we also saw the API directory, and so we can get a lot of information like this. Now, as a final example, I want to show another command of gobuster. Now, the idea is that sometimes it is not true anymore that when we go into a resource that does not exist, we get a 404 not found. Because ultimately, these kind of things can be configured to act differently. So if I configure my server in order to avoid having such enumeration, there are ways in which I can sort of like change the return code. So I can say, look, if you find, for example, a resource that does not exist, so you get a request, but that resource does not exist, do not return a 404 error, because otherwise the enumeration tool will recognize it. Just return a 200 with a custom error page that says not found. This would make it much harder to enumerate, right? And I've prepared a demo for it. Now, in particular, this web server actually exposes two different applications, and these two different applications have two different virtual hosts. So, virtual host. Now, what is a virtual host? We'll talk about this in the next video, which is going to be enumeration at the virtual host layer, at the virtual host level. But the idea is that here, the domain name is different, because instead of being localhost, it's prod.localhost. So it's a different application that has been configured by Nginx to act differently. Now, in this application, for example, let's say that I say asd or something. It says not found, right? However, if we actually check the HTTP response that we get, so we do a curl prod.localhost1337, and then we do asd. Notice what we get, right? I do the -v to get the HTTP code. Well, notice that we actually get a 200 OK, but then the content says not found. So here I've configured this Nginx instance to not follow strictly the HTTP specification in order to confuse such enumeration tools. Because now, if I launch gobuster, I'm not able to easily recognize when a resource exists or when it does not, based on the return code. So let's try to run gobuster as we learned in the previous example. So how would we do it? Well, it's pretty simple, right? So we have gobuster dir, then we put the word list, and I say word list directory common, and then we put the -u with the host, with the host name, so prod.localhost1337. If we launch this command, notice what we get. We get an error. Gobuster understands that this situation is an error. It says, look, the server returns a status code that matches the provided option for non-existing URLs. So like this one, it says 200. So this one should not really exist, but it still says 200. To continue, please exclude the status code or the length. So the idea is that we cannot just rely on the status code anymore because there are a lot of false positives. And with false positive, I mean the tool would say this resource exists, but in reality it does not. And it does not exist because in the Nginx configuration, you don't need to understand this, but the idea is that in this simple Nginx configuration, I mapped the 404 error page to return a 200 and to go to the custom 404.html, which simply returns this HTML string. So I have a custom handling of the 404 error page, and I also change the return code, right? Because I say, look, return a 200, not 400. So this is done so as to make life difficult for like tools like gobuster. So how do we deal with this case? And this is exactly why I wanted to bring this case, because it tells you that the tool by default has certain default choices. So for the tool by default, 200 means the resource is there, 404 the resource is not there. If we want to change this, we have to use a different flag. So we have to use like exclude length 37. Now why do we exclude this specific length? Because the idea is that every page will return a content that has 37 characters. So let's try to do some example with curl. So we do curl http prod.localhost 1337 test, and then we say v, look the content length 37. I try a different resource 37. I try a different resource 37, because it's always the same static string which has 37 characters. So here are 36, and then there's a new line, so that's 37 characters in the body of the HTTP response. So that's the idea. So how do we do that? As I said, we do gobuster dir, then we do word list directory, then we do -u, and then we do prod.localhost, we put the port 1337, then we put, let's say for example, enumerate txt files, but you have to exclude all the results that have 37 in the content length, and we execute the command. Notice what we got immediately. We got a db.txt file, and it says, look, the size is not 37, the size is 41. It means that when we ask for this resource, we did not get the 37 number of characters. Now, does this mean necessarily that this resource exists? No, of course, we cannot have guarantees at this level, but at this point, we can just go into the application, we can just search for it, and boom, we get our flag. 200 not found. So this is a really like a simple challenge that I showed how to solve to showcase that error codes not always tell the truth. It depends on the configuration of your application. Now, most of the time it happens that the configuration used is the default one where 200 are mapped with actually existing resources and 400 are mapped with not existing resources, but that is a configuration that can be changed. In this case, I had this static length for the error page of 37, so we could use that to avoid this configuration, to bypass this mechanism. Maybe in other pages, the error page is custom made and it changes every time. So that's gonna be even harder. I will have to put filter maybe on the output. If the output starts with not found, then I will search for that. So you should get the idea at this point. Enumeration is all about understanding how the web application responds to our queries and understanding what kind of information we can infer from that. The idea is to understand what kind of resources are present within the folder of the web server that are not obvious to know, like for example in the HTML in localhost 1337. And this is the idea of enumeration. It is not a science because there are no certainties for this. You have to develop your own taste, your own intuition with this kind of activity. However, it is extremely important. So to this end, go check out the most important word lists, which are the sec list in GitHub. You can just search GitHub sec list and it should be there. Go download an enumeration tool. In this video I showcase gobuster, but of course there are many other tools, each of which works with a different UI, with a different interface. The idea is that a good enumeration tool should allow you to filter, to make custom filter based on the data present in the HTTP response. So it could be the content length, it could be a specific header, it could be the body itself, maybe matching strings on the body. You have to filter based on the specific logic that is implemented and configured in the web application you're trying to enumerate. So this is it for this video. I hope it was interesting. I hope it showcased what it means to enumerate a web application. And in the next video, we will continue our enumeration with the enumeration of virtual hosts.